I want to talk about YouTube removing the ability for users, for YouTube viewers, to see the dislike count, specifically, not the like count. The number on the likes will still be available, but the number on dislikes will no longer be available on YouTube. And, I saw that this had gotten announced yesterday, which probably when we're recording this versus when you guys see this, probably about a week. This probably be about a week old news at this point. But then I went to Twitter and I started looking at like reactions to the YouTube thing on Twitter, and ironically, almost universally negative. Nobody liked this move. A lot of dislikes on this. I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, it's funny because we just released an Out of Frame episode, recently on Cowboy Bebop, where we talk about fundamentally the importance of, negative feedback. I mean, generally, I'd like to say the importance of accurate feedback, right? Both good and bad. You want people to be rewarded for behavior that is good and for, in the economic sense, creating value for the world. And you want people to be have negative reaction for bad behavior and for, consuming without creating and all of that kind of stuff. So I think YouTube is really doing themselves and everyone else a disservice here. Their arguments are also paper thin. If you look at Twitter, you can just scroll through people, I think, correctly identifying that this is more of a move to defend large corporate accounts than it is. Of course, their messaging strategy here is all about the small creators and what they call review bombing. Part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this anyway is because I had gotten in a conversation with somebody about the Eternals, where they said, it's just the negative reviews are just review bombing. It's just people, just haters going in and saying that they don't like the movie, even though they haven't even seen the movie. Well, first of all, you're not even supposed to be able to do that on Rotten Tomatoes, for example. That was a big deal after Captain Marvel came out. They said a bunch of people had reviewed the movie without having verified that they've seen it. Now, by the way, to keep in mind with this, they never verified that people didn't see it. They just didn't have an option previously to confirm that you did or did not see a movie. So it may very well have been the case that the majority of the negative reviews from Captain Marvel had been from people who saw it as well. And prior to the movie even coming out, I mean, you just say this is an open forum and people are just expressing their opinions about what a movie is going to be or not going to be. But I think you see this a lot lately, where there's this sense that the only time there's negative criticism of something on YouTube is because there's some brigade of trolls coming in and saying it's bad. I mean, this was the argument that Paul Feig made in, once he saw the reaction to the Ghostbusters 2016 trailer, which got, horribly ratioed and is one of the worst viewed videos of all time. But there's also things like YouTube Rewind and, Susan Wojcicki's videos on YouTube, where she goes in and tries to explain policy and stuff, and they get panned widely. But I think you should be really careful in thinking that people's displeasure with those things is fake, because I'm not really sure it is. And I think you'd actually have to prove that it's fake, and you'd have to actually do some work to tell me that it's, like, you can't just say like negative reactions just shouldn't be seen by anybody. I think this does a pretty big disservice to honest feedback on YouTube. And I think who it's going to hurt the most, or rather who the negative reviews typically hurt the most, are these big corporate sort of accounts. YouTube's account being, pretty major among that, but also CNN and MSNBC and Fox and, some of the major studios, Disney, Marvel. I mean, when you look at what people say about a movie like The Eternals, for example, it's not great. And this feels a lot like a move where YouTube is trying to avoid news stories and negative press about, the Eternals trailer, worst reviewed movie of all time, that kind of thing, right? So I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on this? I don't know if you've had much time to really think about it. It sort of just came out, but
my initial reaction is just a long string of decisions that YouTube has made that's at some point it's going to catch up to them.
Yeah.
And I know there's a big feeling around politics and society today to that these tech companies like Facebook, like YouTube, like Twitter are entrenched and will never go away, which is just not historically accurate. And there's never going to be a time if the market is truly free, that's going to ever be truly the case. Yeah. I was just listening to a podcast on the way in here about the history of 20th Century Fox and their rise and eventual fall from being a small upstart studio to being the biggest studio in Hollywood to being bought out by Disney just a short 20, 30 years later after being the biggest studio going.
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon. That's just how business works. And the reason why I bring this all up is because when you stop serving your actual customer what they want and the products that they want, then you're going to end up being left behind. I mean, we see this all the time. I see it with Sears, all the Kmart. I mean, it's just the list goes on and on and on. And these companies are not immune to those. And if you think about like the short time that they've been, FANG is what Facebook, Apple, Netflix, Google.
Oh, is that?
I think that's. I can't remember. Microsoft is maybe in there too. These companies have not been around all that long.
No.
Apple and Microsoft are the old people on the block, but
they are. And Apple's reinvented itself a couple times in the last
over and over again,
years,
and they're going to have to do it again in the next few years too because they see the writing on the wall. But they do have built-in advantages. But again, I just caution people to react quickly with government intervention. Yeah. Yeah. And that's my biggest, like YouTube, do away with the dislike button, but you're gonna irritate the people that pay the bills, and at some point that's going to catch up with them. It's not going to be anytime soon because they obviously have a lot of money, but they have a lot of leeway to make these kind of changes. But at some point it's going to happen, and the only reason it won't happen is if government gets involved.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think, and also, I mean, you can see it. As I said, like, I kind of pulled up Twitter while you were talking, and like, it's near universal dislike of this decision. Like, there are a handful of people who seem to believe the stated reasoning, which is to prevent harassment and whatnot, but the vast majority of people do not. I mean, like, you look through here and people are saying, wow, another horrible feature added from YouTube. If dislikes impact the search algorithm behind the scenes, won't the attack still prove to be effective? So, like, not only challenging, like, the idea of the thing, also, like, a lot of people talking about how this is, can you guys stop making changes to your platform in favor of corporations, please? Which I think is a legitimate concern, because I think that if you really look at where the big ratioed videos are coming from, it's the ones where people feel like they're having sort of propaganda forced down their throats, and where they feel like their YouTube is catering to the big mainstream media networks and film studios and all that kind of stuff. And they give tremendous preference to, and they euphemize it. They call it authoritative sources, but their authoritative sources are like CNN, which is not particularly authoritative if you actually look at their track record,
No. And this is also just a really terrible time of the year for YouTube to be doing something like this from a strategic standpoint. I know a lot of companies and organizations are dealing with their strategic planning for the next year or even longer. Mm-hmm. I am.
Yep.
And like, I'm thinking really, really hard about our video strategy. And is YouTube and Facebook at all worth my time and effort for video hosting? And the answer is leaning really strongly towards no, they're really not right now, just because of the way that they treat smaller content creators in favor of authoritative voices. So mainstream sources.
Yeah. Well, and they're acting like they're acting like you as a potential smaller creator, that the big risks to your ability to thrive on the platform are some nefarious mob of random internet denizens like dislike bombing you for some reason. Like, are you even remotely worried about that? Like,
no, I am not. I am not big enough and significant enough to warrant a review bombing.
No one,
and I'll never get that big if my content continues to be throttled and punished by the algorithm because of wrongthink by me and my organizations.
It's just such a bizarre claim to me, because I look at like the things that I've ever seen that have gotten sort of dislike bombed. First of all, have been genuinely disliked. Yes, there were a lot of people who came in to sort of jump on that bandwagon. But I'm thinking about things like when Brie Larson announced and then launched her YouTube channel, right? With full support of YouTube, by the way. Like, they brought her in, they, paid her to make the channel, like they had her, featured everywhere, and so part of the reason that she got so much hatred and dislike, apart from the fact that quite a lot of people dislike her already, is because they felt like, and I think not incorrectly, they felt like YouTube, which was a platform that was really built by small organic creators rising up from the bottom, was now putting their fingers on the scales saying, no, we want you to watch Brie Larson's channel instead. And everybody hated that because it feels, and frankly, it is a fake thing. It's AstroTurf in the world of YouTube. It's not a real channel, and yet she immediately launched to massive, subscriber numbers, and she was featured all over the place. And so, I don't know, her channel now, I mean, I haven't looked in a while. I can look it up, but like her channel now, which by the way, she quit making videos on. But her channel had like, I don't know. Actually, this is hilarious. I was saying her channel had like 400,000 subscribers in the matter of a couple days because YouTube pushed it so heavily. And because, of course, she has, other social platforms and PR people and whatever. Today, it still only has 656,000 subscribers, which for a celebrity who's been in, MCU movies and everything else, like, is kind of terrible. But, like, for how much that was pushed up. But she's, 4 months ago, I think, was her last upload. And basically, she was like, I'm kind of done doing this. Surprise. Yeah. But yeah, she got a lot of dislikes on all of that because everybody actually felt like it was a bad thing. This is where I get kind of annoyed with all of this, is because the people at YouTube seem to think that like people expressing their one means of or one of their only means of like expressing displeasure in one of their decisions is like all inorganic, fake, trolls, bot accounts, whatever. Like they always kind of make it seem like it's all this fake response, but in fact it's probably a real response, or at least overwhelmingly a real response. They just don't seem to like the response, and instead of modifying their behavior or their policies or whatever, they're just like, well, let's just hide the response. Let's just make sure nobody sees how much everybody hates this. And by the way, some other people have noted too that, and I think this is probably accurate, like if you really start thinking about the potential unintended consequences of this, you still have the ability to comment. So now I suspect if there's any kind of, sort of dislike bombing, it's just going to move to the comments section instead.
Where it will only be more virulent.
Yeah.
Because they got definitely more space.
They got more space and more words to use. So
good job, guys.
Good job. But Paul, I agree though. I think like all of these decisions just make it harder and harder to take YouTube seriously in the long term.
I mean, we Jen touched on it. We're working on planning right now too, and we have serious questions about what is the future of fee on these different platforms. And previously, it wasn't that hard of a question to answer.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
We relatively knew where everything stood, but this year has been very difficult to judge what we can say, what we can't say, how we can say things.
And not just on YouTube, on Facebook and Twitter.
Instagram, everything.
Yeah.
And so we are taking serious looks of what is the correct, or what is the path forward that is sustainable, and it helps us reach our goals. And you know, when companies make it harder and harder for other companies, other users, other small creators to use it, then people are just going to stop using it. So you know what? More power to you. Kill yourself. I mean, that's not. Yeah. That's just what's going to happen in the end, and it's going to take longer than what we'd love, but.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest issue, really, is just that all of these companies are so big at this point that they've got a long runway to expend before they actually have to start really seriously facing the facts on this. And so they can hemorrhage users for years before, really taking a step back and saying maybe we should alter our course. But, hopefully that still leaves a ton of room for other competitors, and it will, as long as Facebook. This is the other thing too, by the way. I've gotten, because most people, if you watch Out of Frame, you may remember the 2 episodes that I did at the end of last year on the documentary The Social Dilemma, which has only sort of become more relevant in a lot of ways, just because everybody keeps talking about the ways in which Facebook and other social platforms sort of harm society. And I rather pointedly took issue with that documentary. I thought it was bad and manipulative. We talked about it on the show. I think we all largely agreed with that. I still get people, maybe once a week or so, who, at least whose comments I actually see, who say, "Oh, you're just a shill for Facebook." And I'm like, my dude, Facebook is lobbying for all of the policies, the rules, all of this stuff that Tristan Harris wanted. That Facebook and Tristan Harris are on the same page. Facebook and their whistleblower are on the same page. They all want the same thing. They want the state more involved in dictating what can and cannot be said, and what the rules are for free expression on social accounts. And guess what? That's what's going to kill other platforms.
Yep.
That's what's going to kill the ability for somebody else to come in and offer a legitimate alternative. It's not going to be Facebook by itself that does it. They are, as you said, they're killing themselves. They're going to get competition. They are already. But if they can mandate that everybody operates exactly the same way they do, then suddenly
there's no room for it.
Competition doesn't matter that much.